Luffy's progression in the manga has been moving at the speed of light, and he's rapidly climbing everybody's top 30 list to the point where most people have him within the top 10. But what if this current Luffy was at Marineford when Ace was being executed? I got this video idea from a Reddit post from Darrow the Dank, so shout out to him. But in this video, I'm going to be breaking down this what if scenario by talking about how strong I think Luffy currently is, where he would rank amongst all the people at Marineford, and how the arc would have played out if the current Luffy was there. As always, if you like content like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the King Pirates crew. And if you have a good time watching this video, please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. But with that said, let's get into our first discussion topic of how strong I think the current Luffy is. Now, I discussed this a bit during my own top 30 stream, which I also did a video on. It'll be linked up here. But essentially, as of right now, Luffy has entered that top tier territory for me. Now, obviously, everybody has their own opinions, and there's going to be some disagreements on who's ranked at the top. Some people like myself think that characters like Dragon and Blackbeard are stronger because they're gonna play a role later in the story. And then of course you have the much heated debates of Shanks versus Mihawk and the Admirals versus Yonko. But despite the different opinions people might have, I think for most people there's a pretty clear top tier. For me personally, the people that are currently in that top tier are the Yonko, all of the Admirals including Akainu and Aokiji, Mihawk, Dragon, and now Luffy. Now once again, that's just my personal top tier. I'm sure other people value other characters more like Sabo and Ben Beckman. But as far as the current Luffy goes, I think whatever that top tier you have is, he has entered it. And I really think that's a really big step because that top tier is elite territory. The best way I described it is, despite the fact that you might be weaker than other people, once you enter into that tier, you don't think that you're gonna lose to anybody else. Like Kizaru, for example, if you put him against Big Mom and Kaido, he would probably lose. But as we saw in the story, he was still very confident in himself when he told Akainu that he would go to Wano and take care of them. And even though I think he would have obviously lost in that situation, I don't see why he shouldn't be confident in himself when he's one of the 10 to 12 strongest people in the world. Because at the very least, even if he doesn't win, he could probably get away safely. So for me, that's the territory Luffy has entered, and I think it's warranted given all the progression he's gone through in Wano. First off, in Udon, he learned Ryo, which when he first used it against Kaido on the rooftop, that actually did some damage. And that was really the first time Kaido actually kind of respected Luffy a bit, where he had that moment thinking about Luffy's potential and how much stronger he could get. So I think Luffy learning Ryo and giving him mastery of two types of hakis was a pretty big deal, even though it kind of seems minor at this point given all the other progression he's made. Which, speaking of that, after he got bodied again by Kaido, he somehow learned Advanced Conqueror's Haki. This is an ability that very few people have in the world, which Kaido even pointed out. And I think anytime you gain an ability or showcase a feat that only few of the strongest in the world have showcased, that's an important thing to note. Like, I don't think there's one defining quality like Advanced Conqueror's Haki that qualifies you for that top territory, but instead there's like a bunch of different boxes that you can check, and Luffy's starting to check them off. Because even after learning the advanced technique of all three hakis, Luffy still got bodied by Kaido. But somehow, literally as this man was falling off of Onigashima, he got even stronger. Like quite literally as he was falling off, he somehow learned how to communicate with the voice of all things. Now at this point, it's still kind of unclear whether or not the voice of all things is actually gonna make Luffy stronger, but if we're talking about abilities that few people have in the story, this is the first time we've seen anybody use the voice of all things in this way. Momonosuke did use it to talk to Zunisha, but that seemed more of like a Kazuki clan thing, so I do think Luffy starting to figure out the power of the voice of all things is important to note. And then of course when Luffy got back up to the rooftop and fought with Kaido again, that's when he became, as he is known on this channel, Skyfucker Luffy. But yeah, once again, Luffy splitting the skies, that's another feat that only the few strongest in the story have done. So with all these abilities and feats Luffy is racking up, you can't tell me that he hasn't entered into that top tier territory. At this point, the only ability that he's missing is Devil Fruit Awakening, but Luffy's literally already defeated two people that have Awakening, so Awakening is not the end all be all. Now of course, even with all of these new abilities, I don't think Luffy is like top 5. I think he still has a ways to go in mastering all of these abilities, and even in this current fight against Kaido, I still don't think Luffy is as strong as Kaido, and Kaido probably still has another level to go. But at the same time, Kaido's kind of an unfair opponent because at the very worst, he's top 5. So the more important question we have to answer is, where does the current Luffy rank at Marineford? And there's a lot of strong people he's competing against. It's one of the reasons that we love Marineford, because it was really our first glimpse at all of these strong people, the elites of the world. First off, we had all of the Shichibukai like Hancock, Doflamingo, and Mihawk, and it wasn't just the ones that had the title at the time. We also had former warlords like Crocodile and Jinbei. Of course, the admirals are also there, and the important important thing to consider here is that Garp and Sengoku were still like pretty elite. Then there's also Whitebeard and all of his commanders, some random people like Ivankov, and of course at the end the Blackbeard pirates and the Red Hair pirates both show up. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, it's pretty crazy how many big time people were in that arc, and we definitely saw during that arc how outmatched pre-time skip Luffy was. But the Luffy now though is a completely different story, and while I don't think he would be the strongest there, he's still pretty damn close. First off, I think the current Luffy is clearly stronger than all of the Whitebeard Yonko commanders, including Marco and Ace. I do think Marco is really strong, but at this point he's just not gonna stack up to Luffy. And then with Ace, you have to remember we're talking about a pre-time skip Ace, who is definitely weaker than the current Luffy. Now if Ace survived and also had 2 years to train, that would be a different story. But pre-time skip, I don't think any Yonko commanders are touching Luffy, and that includes the Blackbeard pirates and the Red Hair pirates. The Blackbeard pirates, I think it's no question, at that point they weren't even a Yonko crew yet, and most of them don't have the devil fruits they have now. The Red Hair pirates, on the other hand, were already established as a Yonko crew, and as we found out in a recent Viva card? No, SBS. I always get them messed up. As we found out in a recent SBS, all the people that went with Shanks during Marineford are technically officers. But even despite that, I don't think any of them are stacking up to the current Luffy, including Lucky Roux and Yasopp. Now the one person I think has a chance is Ben Beckman, because he is the right hand, and of course in his Viva card it did say he was comparable to Shanks, even though it was a little unclear whether or not that was referring to power. So Ben Beckman I think is the only person you could probably make an argument for, but if I had to pick, I still think the current Luffy is stronger. Now as far as the warlords go, most of them are not going to be competition for Luffy because Luffy literally defeated most of them. Jinbei has also literally joined Luffy's crew, so he's definitely not stronger than Luffy. So that only really leaves us with Boa Hancock, Kuma, and Mihawk. Now starting with Hancock, I do think she's overlooked by a lot of people because she hasn't really showcased her power in the story. The fact that she has Conqueror's Haki as well I think is a pretty big deal, but I also think some people have swerved too much and have overrated Boa Hancock. Like, I think she's strong and her having Conqueror's Haki is a big deal, but let's not get overboard here. It's not like she's using advanced Conqueror's Haki. So Hancock against the current Luffy, I don't think she stands a chance. Not that she would ever want to fight him anyways. The same thing I think goes for Kuma, who I think is underrated, but competing against the current Luffy, he's not gonna stack up. So really the only warlord to consider is Mihawk, and I do think Mihawk is still stronger than Luffy. Now I will admit, Mihawk's strength is very hard to evaluate because the feats that he showcased in the story, most of which came in Marineford, weren't really that impressive. He had an attack blocked by Jozu, he also got stopped by Crocodile, and got stopped by Vista as well. He also failed to cut up Buggy. Really the one dope thing that he did was cut up a big iceberg, but that's not really even that impressive at this point. So as far as feats go, I will admit it doesn't look too great for Mihawk, but I don't think he was actually trying a Marineford. I know that kind of seems like an excuse, but with Mihawk, I really evaluate his power with the narrative. And at the end of the day, this is the person that Zoro is trying to surpass. Which, speaking of Zoro, the current Zoro has also made a lot of progressions. So honestly, I think because of that, we could use the current Zoro as an example. Do we really think if we put the current Zoro that cut up Kaido and has advanced Conqueror's Haki in Marineford, he's getting stopped by Jozu, Vista, and Crocodile and can't cut up Buggy? I don't think that would be the case, and that's why I think Mihawk wasn't really trying that much at Marineford. And also, we do know that Mihawk had legendary duels before with Shanks, and I don't really care if you think Mihawk or Shanks is stronger, but given that they had legendary duels, it probably means that they're pretty close in strength. So as of right now, I still don't think the current Luffy surpasses Mihawk at Marineford. So Mihawk is the first person I'm putting above current Luffy, and everybody else we're gonna talk about might be above him as well. First off, we have Luffy versus the pre-time skip Admirals, which I do think is pretty close. And I did do a video a while back about Luffy versus the Admirals, and in that video, I did say I think Luffy has surpassed the Admirals. But not long after that video dropped, Luffy dropped from Onigashima, so I took a big L on that, so I'm very cautious about putting Luffy over the Admirals now. With that said though, I still have a hard time believing that the current Luffy will lose to the pre-time skip Admirals. Like, even if we're talking about the current Admirals, I don't think Luffy is stronger than Akainu or Aokiji. And up against the other Admirals, I think he's very close to equal. And I think with the pre-time skip Admirals, Luffy is probably close to equal as well, but if I had to pick one, I'll probably give the edge to the Admirals because they put in a lot of work in that arc. But like I mentioned earlier, if we're talking about the Marines, the Admirals are not the only ones we have to worry about because Garp and Sengoku were still thriving. Post-time skip, since both of them are kind of retired now, a lot of people have them ranked lower, but pre-time skip, and maybe this is just my Garp bias coming through, but I think Garp and Sengoku were the two strongest Marines there. And I think think that showed in the way they were represented in that war, where the two of them kind of sat back the whole time. Like Sengoku barely did a thing. Whereas on the other side, Whitebeard kind of did that for a while, kind of just examining the war before actually taking action himself. And also just in terms of portrayal, I do think Garp was the Marine rival of Roger, given how many times that was mentioned and also how they fought together at God Valley. And although I think Garp is probably stronger than Sengoku, I think they're pretty close as well, and Sengoku did become the fleet admiral. So honestly, I think at Marineford, both Garp and Sengoku were stronger than Luffy. And I think the same still goes for Whitebeard. Even though he was kind of sick and nowhere near his prime, he was still very clearly Yonko level back then, and let's not forget how much work this man put in that arc. I feel like there's been a bit of revisionist history with Whitebeard because he probably wasn't the strongest in the world back then given his old age, but he still was an absolute monster, and I think stronger than the current Luffy. Besides Whitebeard, there was also Shanks and Blackbeard, and Shanks I definitely think was stronger than the current Luffy, but Blackbeard is kind of a tough one, especially at the beginning of that arc when he doesn't have the Gura Gura no Mi yet. And honestly, at that point, I don't think he's stronger than the current Luffy. He did win against Ace, but I think with all the abilities that the current Luffy has, Blackbeard at Marineford is definitely weaker than the current Luffy. So in terms of power, that's how I think the current Luffy stacks up against the people at Marineford. But let's get to the big question of how he would have changed the outcome of the arc. Now, first things first, given that this is a what if, let's establish some ground rules. And I think the premise I want to set up is everything going into the arc is still the same. It's just that Luffy has the current power and abilities that he has now. So technically, he hasn't gone through all the experiences he has post time skip. He just has all those abilities in terms of power. That way we don't really alter the story too much, and it's a lot easier to discuss this what if. But yeah, to start things off, we have to talk about Luffy's entrance into the war because he gets there a little later. So the beginning part of that war with the Whitebeard pirates against the Marines, that still goes down accordingly, and that's really important because one of the great things about Marineford is that we really saw a lot of back and forth tactics being used. So when Luffy enters the scene falling from the sky, everything else is still the same. The ground is frozen over, walls are being put up so the Whitebeard pirates are trapped. But from that point on though, things are really gonna start to deviate with the current Luffy showing up. As far as Luffy's actions go, given that he's still the same Luffy, just stronger, I think he's still gonna take the same course of action. It's just that this time around he's a lot stronger. So like originally he was getting cut up and he was really struggling with just basic Marines. This time obviously that's not gonna be the case. He's gonna tear through everybody, and actually I think one of the first things he might do is use his Conqueror's Haki to knock a bunch of people out. It'd be like the same thing he did at Fishman Island, maybe not as effective, but even if he knocks out like 10,000 people, that's gonna be a pretty big deal as far as even out the playing field. Because on the Whitebeard pirate side, Whitebeard was the only one with Conqueror's Haki, and it didn't seem like he could use that power. So I think Luffy arriving will immediately kind of tip the scales, and then things kind of just play out the same afterwards, where he gets a lot of help from other people like Jinbei, Ivankov, and Boa Hancock. Boa then would get him the key to Ace's cuffs, which I think this time around he probably doesn't break. After that though, Luffy has that quick skirmish with Mihawk, who is one of the few people I think is still stronger than the current Luffy. Now in the original interaction, Luffy kind of like almost uses Future Sight, which ironically he has now, so he'll be able to do the same. But beyond that, I think he might actually exchange some blows with Mihawk, which would be really epic to see. But like I mentioned earlier, I don't think Mihawk was taking things that seriously during Marineford, so it won't really be that big of a fight. Plus Luffy's main goal is trying to get to Ace, so Vista will probably come in and clash with Mihawk just like he did before. But after that is where things go south a bit for the Whitebeard pirates, with the Marines bringing in the Pacifistas, and also Squard stabs Whitebeard. And I think that scenario probably plays out the same because that was something Akainu had planned. And even though Luffy is stronger and he does have Future Sight, he's not really going to be focused on Whitebeard. He's completely focused on saving Ace. So I think Whitebeard still ends up getting stabbed by Squard, so he is going to be weaker, but that does prompt Whitebeard to take action, and now you have Luffy and Whitebeard going hand in hand all out at the Marines. After that becomes a pretty critical part of the tactical warfare, where the Marines really put up the walls, but Oars Jr. is blocking one exit, which that eventually leads to the legendary moment of Luffy charging through and landing in front of the three admirals. Now originally when that happened, the admirals did not take him seriously and kind of just let him do what he wanted and just beat his ass. But this time around, after seeing Luffy's power, I'm sure they're going to be going all out. Marco is also going to swoop in here and help, so we're going to get like a 3v2 of the admirals versus Luffy and Marco, and this is where I think things are really going to just escalate to a full-out brawl. At this point, the Whitebeard pirates are all going to charge through as well, and Whitebeard's going to give the command to back up Luffy. So I think this is where things probably really change from the original story. Like Marco, instead of trying to go after Ace and getting punched by Garp, he'll probably just try to hold off Kizaru just for a while so Luffy can go ahead. I'd imagine Whitebeard is a lot more aggressive, maybe going going directly after Akainu. And then I think with the current Luffy's power, with the help of like Jozu and some of the other commanders, Aokiji can be held off so that Luffy can advance. Which then really gets us to the final boss battle of Luffy versus Garp and Sengoku. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I do think both of them are stronger than Luffy, but one thing we have to consider is that Garp is kind of going through a lot right now. He's kind of mentally unstable. Even during Marineford, he got punched by Luffy, even though he was way stronger than him. So I honestly don't think Garp is going to be much of a factor. He'll probably just get knocked off to the side and not fight back. So it's really just Luffy versus Sengoku, and I'm sure Sengoku's going to be a lot more serious this time around. The first time around, Luffy tanked a hit with just Gomu Gomu no Fuzen and was able to save Ace. This time around, definitely not going to be as easy. Sengoku's going to be going full out. But even despite that, and the fact that I think Sengoku is stronger than the current Luffy, I think Luffy, just like the first time around, will be able to do enough to free Ace. I think he'll be really using Future Sight to his advantage, and with the speed of Gear 4th, he should be able to free Ace. And this time around with Future Sight in his bag, I don't think he's always going to be able to break the key. So I think just like in Marineford, Luffy does free Ace and there's a sense of optimism. Now I do think at this point the Whitebeard pirates are probably a little beat up from holding off the Admirals. Whitebeard did still get stabbed by Squard as well, but the situation is a lot less dire with the current Luffy there as well, where they might not have to sacrifice Whitebeard and they could kind of try to fight back instead of Whitebeard just like sacrificing himself so everybody could leave. Whitebeard might still try to do that because that was his plan from the get-go, but Luffy might not let him. So at this point, I think this will be the most brutal part of the war where everybody's just going at it, fighting to the death. Now, Blackbeard will be the first one to show up here, but the situation's not going to be what he expects. And honestly, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to take advantage like he did before and steal Whitebeard's fruit. I think there's definitely still going to be a chance because Whitebeard is still going to take a lot of damage, but at the very least, Blackbeard is going to struggle a lot more, and maybe that's just enough time for Shanks to show up and change things even more. And if that's the case, I think the situation becomes completely unpredictable because unlike the original story, Whitebeard and Ace are not dead at this point, so Sengoku has no reason to just give up and lose to pirates. Kobe probably still has that moment of like pleading for everybody to stop fighting, but I honestly don't think Sengoku's just gonna admit defeat here. Sengoku is one of the better Marines, but he's still the fleet admiral and he's willing to take the actions necessary to win the war. So if Ace is not executed and Whitebeard is still alive, I don't think he gives up. So honestly, I think the aftermath is just gonna be an absolute bloodbath, and the battle will probably continue until Whitebeard maybe sacrifices himself again. Blackbeard will probably try to take advantage, but I'm not sure if Shanks is gonna let him. But I think with Whitebeard dying, that might be enough for Sengoku to stop the war. So in the end, I think Luffy does save Ace, but Whitebeard is still sacrificed. But those are just my opinions. I definitely want to hear yours as well in the comments. Go get yourself some One Piece manga with the link in the description, and let's start off the first game of the year with a simple rock, paper, scissors, shoot. If you lose, you have to like, subscribe, and watch this video. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot!